Well, Garrick, most important, of course, is that the people will have the final say in all this tomorrow, and they're expected to turn out in a big way. One estimate shows 90% of those registered will go to the polls. Well, Garrick Ortega himself is saying that Garrick Ortega himself is saying it's not enough just to take his word for it. He's accepting the need for strict mechanisms, perhaps by the United Nations, to ensure that the Sandinistas live up to their promises. Garrick Ortega himself is saying it's not enough just to take his word for it. Well, Garrick Ortega himself is saying that it's not enough just to take his... Garrick Ortega himself is saying it's not enough just to take his word for it. He's accepting the need for strict mechanisms. He's accepting the need for strict mechanisms. Who's anybody on this line, or?
Everyone was staggered by this election and its results. That is, up until the last 2 days.
The election itself may have been democratic, but the conditions leading up to it, with the Contras and the economic embargo and all of the CIA meddling in this area, certainly weren't democratic. So where you draw the line on democracy and the ballot box, I don't know. It's questionable.
It's February 1990 in Managua, Nicaragua. Some 1,500 journalists from around the world have descended upon this tiny nation to report on Nicaragua's national elections. Among the clutter of television reporters, news writers, and radio announcers was a TV crew of 5 from Chicago, myself included, here to document the U.S. news media and how the mainstream press would interpret these events and transmit their version of the story back home.
One who says she voted so her family's life could be better. The other who says her vote was to strengthen her nation. Deborah? Jane Whitney, NBC News, Managua.
Okay. All right, what's next?
They buy it?
Yeah.
It would be very arrogant of me to say that it scares me when I think about some of the coverage that goes out and some of the misconceptions that go out. But it does. Because I think people come in here with preconceived ideas. I did it, not into Nicaragua, but into Salvador. And fortunately, I'll be honest, I had 6 months down there before I went on the air and started reporting and have been able to work them out. Unless you're a veteran who's, and I'm not saying that there aren't exceptions, but somebody who comes back on a recurring basis has an advantage. They have a frame of reference, they have perspective. And it's a very hard thing to do, to tell this story in a minute and a half or a minute 45. And if you don't have that perspective, I get worried.
Can this complex of a situation be told in a minute 45? Or what would be the cumulative effect of those short stories?
Could you just stop down for a second? Because that's very, what would be the cumulative effect of...
If things are boiled down to minute 30 or minute 40 or whatever, you know, and that's
I'm a great believer in if you're only getting your news from television, you're not getting your news.
The 1990 election would be the second democratic election in Nicaragua's history, the first being in 1984, when the ruling Sandinista party took an overwhelming majority. In this election, there are 21 political parties vying for power, most prominently the FSLN, Sandinista Liberation Front, also known as the Frente, led by President Daniel Ortega, and the U.S.-backed UNO coalition, headed by newspaper publisher Violeta Chamorro. The election campaign magnified the political complexity of Nicaragua. It's a society with deep splits between rich and poor, peasant and landowner, and splits even within families. The Chamorro family of Managua, for instance, runs newspapers on opposite ends of the political spectrum, La Prensa on the right and Barricada on the left. The election was ultimately a referendum on which party stood the greatest chance of ending the 9-year-old Contra War and reconstructing Nicaragua's devastated economy.
Certainly, the Frente is the only one who can manage this, because the Frente has given land to the campesinos, given them schools, health clinics, everything. You can see that the Frente is with poor people, not with the bourgeoisie. Uno is the National Guard, somosistas, those who have come to cause problems.
Okay, I feel that the government is not a democratic government as far as giving the opportunity to people to work more freely. That's my own personal opinion, and that's why I'm not putting down any government. Like this government has never said anything bad about my family here. They have always. My dad worked for the Somoza government. My mom is still here. She's still alive. We have never lost anything. So.
Votaríamos por la Violeta si la Violeta fuera puesta por el pueblo. Y eso es lo que no es puesta por el pueblo, es puesta por
We would vote for Violeta if she were put there by the people, not by the gringos. That's what bothers us. Now we want to continue with a man who has struggled since 1961. Understand? That's why we would vote for the Frente Sandinista.
Garrick, most important, of course, is that the voters will have the final say in this tomorrow, and they're expected to turn out in a big way. One estimate shows 90% of those registered will go to the polls. Television, in presenting images and words about a subject, can have a dramatic effect or impact. And so, because that's true, we have to be very careful, obviously, in how we go about our jobs, and we try to go about that in a responsible and competitive fashion, because we, after all, are competing with the others. And in the final analysis, the only thing any of us reporters has is our integrity and the accuracy we bring to bear. We don't have anything else. If people lose confidence in us out there, then we're done for.
It is clear that the administration has a lot of clout in directing how the press moves and what they cover. Bernard Cohen wrote a book on the media, and he made the point that the press doesn't tell us what to think, but they tell us what to think about. And the administration is aware of that, and through the power of the White House, through the power to call a press conference and to put out press releases and to extrapolate dangers using the charts and the satellite photographs that purportedly show MiGs on the ground, and the whole apparatus that an administration has perfected in focusing the news. They make it imperative for the press to swing their cameras around and say, okay, the administration thinks this is important. We have to give this some importance.
Did you stop already?
She better have the coffee ready.
True.
Ready?
Yeah.
We're going to walk with you.
The other who says her vote was to strengthen her nation. Deborah?
Very nice people. Very nice.
Thank you for your call.
Well, let's see if it gets in the show. I think it should. It's a nice piece.
It's a nice piece. Thanks to a lot of people. Most of the people we interviewed.
Down here, it is the domino effect. And there's so many people and there's so much time for a minute and a half, and people say, is that all there is? And sometimes you say, I mean, I say that myself when it's over. Like today. It's like, I'm not saying I want to do an hour special on it. I'm just saying you want the time to reasonably be able to tell the story. And that doesn't always happen, but that's not going to change. It's just the way it is.
I think that in some cases, and again, I can't make a blanket statement about this, but I think in some cases, correspondents come to places like Central America and are faced with a very complex situation. Sometimes their ability to communicate is limited. They don't speak Spanish well enough. Sometimes their contacts in the government or outside the government, in the opposition, whatever, the contacts in general in the country are not that profound. Their contacts aren't that good. And they come down with a very heavy amount of political baggage here. Stuff that they picked up from working in the United States and from reading the propaganda that comes out of Washington. And it's tough to see the other side of the coin if you've been bombarded by so much material, by so much of the Washington line. It's difficult to get through that. I can understand that.
Nicaragua is a nation of about 3.5 million people situated in the heart of Central America. Until the Sandinista Revolution in 1979, Nicaragua had been dominated by the United States, either by direct military invasions and occupations, or through alliances with dictators such as the Somoza family, Anastasio Sr., Luis, and finally Anastasio Jr. U.S. troops made direct invasions in 1911, 1912, and occupied Nicaragua from 1925 until 1933. The U.S. military was finally driven out by nationalist leader General Augusto Cesar Sandino, who put together an army of 6,000 Nicaraguans to fight off U.S. intervention. Sandino was murdered by Somoza's National Guard in 1934, but it was his struggle that inspired the Sandinista Liberation Front, who toppled the younger Somoza in 1979. Shortly after the Sandinistas took power, the Reagan administration began a decade-long effort to undermine the government, creating and funding a counter-revolutionary force comprised initially of ex-Somoza National Guardsmen. The Contra War led to the deaths of 30,000 Nicaraguans and caused damages estimated at over $10 billion. In 1985, the Reagan administration enacted a full trade embargo against Nicaragua, further hampering their economy.
We have had this hegemony or control of this area for hundreds of years, several hundred years. We have controlled this area of Central America. Now, when a country decides that you're not going to control us anymore, then our country goes straight up. I mean, they get mad because they want to control it. And when the president wants a government overthrown, the CIA follows his orders. And they engage in all kinds of covert activity in this country, pay people of this country to betray their own land. And they, of course, this is why I left the CIA, because I could not go along with paying citizens of a country to betray their own government. And that's what the CIA does.
Can you tell us a little background about how you got involved with the Contra and what was the role of the United States in that?
Yes. In 1982, the CIA has been supporting the Contras in Honduras, and there was a big struggle in Congress. The President of the United States, Ronald Reagan, needed money for the Contras. And then the CIA invited me and other Nicaraguans to be a board of directors to package the Contras for the American press and say, you know, here are, these guys are not Somocistas, these guys are going to bring democracy to Nicaragua. So we were invited, I was invited as a figurehead, and the CIA was using me, not to speak through me to the press, to Congress. So I was being told that the objectives were to bring democracy, but in private we were told something different. We were told that we were going to overthrow the Nicaraguan government. So there was a lot of duplicity.
Observer groups from the United Nations, the Organization of American States, and the Jimmy Carter Center, among others, made Nicaragua's electoral process the most scrutinized of any election in Latin American history. It was a stark contrast to recent elections in countries like El Salvador, Guatemala, the Dominican Republic, and Paraguay, which were rife with fraud and political repression.
Who will win the elections? That's hard to say. I think UNO will win. At least these are fair elections. Yes, they are, especially with so many international observers. In fact, it's a bit embarrassing, like we're some shameless scoundrels and the whole world has to check on us. There was a time in Latin America when there were 19 or 20 dictatorships propped up by the gringos. There's a tradition of getting power and not leaving, because power has a very delicious taste.
The procedures that have been evolved by the Nicaraguan people,
los procedimientos que han sido definidos por el pueblo nicaragüense,
are adequate to assure
son adecuados para asegurar
that votes can be cast freely,
que los votos se pueden emitir libremente,
secretly and counted accurately,
y tabulados correctamente, fidedignamente,
and tabulated properly.
Y también tabulados apropiadamente.
If there are any improprieties or
si hubieran
fraud,
irregularidades o fraude,
they will be detected
serán detectados
and reported to the Nicaraguan people and to the world.
Y reportados al pueblo nicaragüense y al mundo.
I don't agree with the conspiracy theories of American journalism in regards to, for example, Central America. I don't agree that there is a conspiracy going on between American media and the American government to mislead the American people. I think there is a conspiracy within, for example, there was within the Reagan administration to mislead the American public, to mislead the American media, to mislead the American Congress. I mean, we saw this very clearly with the Iran-Contra affair. I mean, everybody was misled by the Reagan administration. The American Congress, the American people, the American media, we were lied to. We know that.
I indict the American press. They are the willing handmaidens of a repressive administration. H.L. Mencken said the press is free to the man who owns one. The press in America is controlled by rich people, controlled by ads, controlled by favors of official sources and big government. If they come afoul of these official sources and big government, they lose the sources and big government takes steps to move against them.
There was an election here in Nicaragua in 1984, and I think most people have probably forgotten that because there was a brilliant piece of agenda setting up in Washington, whereby they suddenly decided that the Sandinistas were getting MiGs into the country. And although the entire press corps down here knew that this wasn't true, because it had been announced in Washington, we were all obliged by our foreign editors and news desks to go running up to the port and investigate the arrival of these mythical and non-existent MiGs, and the whole election coverage was abandoned. So everybody had covered the entire campaign, but everybody ceased to cover the election itself because Washington very cleverly changed the issue from the issue of democracy in Nicaragua to the issue of national security.
The United States has circumstantial evidence suggesting that as many as a dozen Soviet MiG-21 jets may have arrived today at the Nicaraguan port of Corinto.
We're keeping a careful watch.
The slant is remarkably favorable to policymakers. And it's favorable to the policymakers in the United States in a different way. There was a tremendous gap during the Reagan administration between just verifiable empirical reality, the facts on the one hand, and the statements that public officials would make. And we had a president who would look straight at the camera and with a moving presence and a deeply affected voice say things that were absolutely false.
We did not, repeat, did not trade weapons or anything else for hostages.
I do.
Oh, you're okay. Ready to roll?
Yeah, let's do it.
Can I ask you very frankly, which way you're going to vote and why?
I'm going to vote for FSLN, and I'm going to vote for them because I think it's a vote for dignity, for freedom, for democracy. It's a vote of confidence.
What do you think are the main issues of the election in Nicaragua?
You know, when you're a photojournalist, you try to back off and not become part of that, because I think it can bias you. And you know, as a photojournalist, we really have to step back and see it as a balanced issue. Personally, I have my own thoughts about it personally, but I don't let my own thoughts get in my way of the coverage of an event.
2 a.m., yeah, the 26th, day after the election. About a half hour ago, the LA Times announced that they were going to use the results of what's called a quick count. They were given access to representative precincts across the country to take the ballots, count them, and use that as an authoritative indication of how the vote across the country might go, and that they're going to print that in tomorrow's Los Angeles Times, which will project UNO as the winner of this election. For some reason, it seems that the people told the pollsters one thing and went out and did something else in the privacy of the polling booth. And as far as whether this, in fact, if somebody like Bud Lewis is going with this information confidently enough to go front page on the LA Times, I think what we're looking at is a really extraordinary political upset victory that people will be analyzing for quite a while, and that's going to change the entire composition of Central American politics for a long time.
But the issue was not democracy. The issue was who was going to run the country. And the United States succeeded, at least in the short run, in persuading Nicaraguans to put in power a government like the Somoza governments of the past that listens carefully when Washington has something to say. Whether they're going to stick to that decision when they have a chance to vote again in 6 years is another question altogether. I would doubt it.
Creo que se va a dar una fuerte lucha de clases en Nicaragua con ribetes de violencia.
I believe now there will be a very tough struggle in Nicaragua between the classes with a lot of violence. There will be strikes and conflicts of this nature. I hope we don't have the kind of violence we had in the times of Somoza, but it's possible.
Porque detrás de la UNO quien va a mandar es el Departamento de Estado norteamericano.
We realize the American government will now have influence here. Behind UNO, the one who will give the orders is the U.S. Department of State. They will try to create a sort of Taiwan in Nicaragua. They will Taiwanize the economy of Nicaragua in the sense that they will create a mirage, inject money which will create a fictitious economy where consumerism predominates, a very dangerous factor which will provoke political and ideological deviations among the people. The people of Nicaragua have suffered a tremendous economic crisis, but within this crisis there has been hope, the revolutionary hope.
I think if the opposition wins in this country, we will see the collapse of all of the enlightenment that the Sandinistas have tried to bring to this country. We'll see the return of xenophobia, of classism, of racism, of the whiter you are, the better you are. The more money your family has, the better person you are. The Sandinistas have tried to instill this country. They've tried to instill new values here. values of hard work, values of courage, values of something more than consumption and presumption. And that's why I'm interested in Nicaragua. Not just because Newsweek pays me to be here to make pictures of Daniel Ortega or the war or anything else.
There's something to be said. When you live in Central America, I've been down here only a year and a half, but I'll tell you something. You come down here thinking you know all the answers. And the longer you stay, the more you realize you don't. There's no easy answer to El Salvador. There's no easy answer to Nicaragua. There wasn't an easy answer, really, if you think about it, to Panama. I guess what I'm saying is being here, I see things that I would want to change and that I would want for these people. And you want them to have the chance to have a good life. But I'm not sure you can clone the United States' version of that in this part of the world.
I am sure that this is a great step forward for Nicaragua. We continue with the Frente and with the government that takes office. Our independence will always be guaranteed by the FSLN. Even when they made errors along the way, they always safeguarded the dignity of the people. I can also say that in Nicaragua there has never been such democracy as there has been with these elections.
The same way they sell us our clothes and our cars. They sell us everything from youth to religion. The same time they sell us our wars. I want to know who the men in the shadows are. I want to hear somebody asking them why. They can be counted on to tell us who our enemies are, but they're never the ones to fight or to die. And there are lights in the balance. There are people under fire. There are children at the cannons. And there is blood on the wire.
Hi, I'm Terry Doran, Director of Cable Access Incorporated, the support group for our public access channel, Channel 10, right here in Fort Wayne, Indiana. You know, I'm standing here in front of the old fort, and Fort Wayne was named after General Mad Anthony Wayne, whose main claim to fame was doing away with the Indians. He did this in the name of progress and civilization. This is civilization. That's why I believe in deep dish. On deep dish, you can tell the Indian side of the story.
Okay, deep dish. Now we have to see how that cooks. Deep dish pie with a lot of different kinds of apples and whole wheat flour. And it'll pick up a lot of good television. You just tilt it up like this. Deep dish.
I'm Don Sherry from Public Access in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Why do I watch Deep Dish TV? Because this is the desert, and there's nothing else to do but watch TV.
Hi, we're from Viacom Community Television in Seattle, Washington, and we need Deep Dish TV because it makes the world a better place to watch TV in.
Yep. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Sure does,
Sure. Yep, that's the truth. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.